Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Point of View. I believe we have already quite a few people online, and thanks for joining today. For if you are here for the first time, Leadership Point of View is a live series that brings sharp insights on forward-thinking leadership and the evolving workplace. Each 25-minute session features a thought leader or a thought-provoking idea where they share their unique perspective or story on specific leadership dimensions. So, because we know that stories shape perspectives and inspire action, they are quite a tool to have effective leadership. And that's why today's speaker is someone that I have known for half of my life today, which is Vishal Jodani. I'll bring him in a moment. And about myself, leadership point of view, beyond being the host, I'm the co-founder of Ritmoo, a Go management platform and strategic leadership services. And I started building these short insights because I felt that, there's a lot of content out there, but we always hear the same people. And I believe in the power of bringing unique individuals to the stage. So with that, I'll bring Vishal Jodani to join us. Vishal, you are a leadership coach, a change expert with a background in communication and advertisement. You have helped a lot of people with storytelling, including myself, also to find clarity and purpose. So very inspired by your story, but I let you take the lead in today's session and engage the audience on this power of story.
Great. Thank you so much, Ugo. And thank you to all those who've joined. I'm really excited to be here. This is my favorite topic. Ugo and I had a discussion on what we could talk about. And I was like, if I had one topic, it would be story. Because for me, stories are not just tools to entertain, but to connect, inspire, influence. And what I'm most excited about is storytelling is an art and a science, and it's for everyone. You don't need a PhD, but you can have practical tools to actually use the skill in powerful ways. So I call stories magic. For me, I would love to get a sense of who's actually here and why are you here? And I'll tell you why I am here. But if you could just quickly type in your name in chat, where you're calling from, like where are you located? And if you had to leave with one thing, what would that be? So why are you here? So I'll just try to get a pulse check so I can see Harris. Hey, Harris. But yeah, while you type this in, I will tell you why I am here. I am here to show you that stories are magical and they are absolutely within your reach. And you just need the right tools to actually bring those stories up to life. So that's my focus, is to make this exciting and accessible to everyone. So we've got Kareem from Dubai. You've got Harris from Amsterdam, who's now in Thailand, and you want to tell stories to drive change. All right. Anyone else? So we can tailor this story for you. Great. We've got Sandra. Hey, Sandra from Austria and Tanzania. You want to listen to my speech? Thank you. Hey, Manuel, good to see you. You want to hear the secret sauce? Okay. Hey, Matt, good to see you. Mariella, I'm glad you could join. So you want to learn how to improve storytelling and pitch to clients, brands, and suppliers. And Kareem wants to use it as a passionate public speaker. Great. All right, so let the other voices come in. This really helps to get a sense of who we are talking to. Hey, Ujvala, you want to tell stories to people to inspire them to have the same vision that drives me. Great. From a leadership situation, I am a big fan of the work you are doing in India. And Esther, you want to get inspiration around storytelling for your own context. And because of us, thank you. This is good clarity and also a good ego massage. Evelyn, good to see you. You want to bring authentic storytelling to your sales career? All right. Great. There are more coming in, but let me keep moving on with what's ahead. So I know, as Ugo has mentioned, this is a power lunch session, at least depending on where people are joining from. We have about 25 minutes. So what I will do is, this won't be a deep dive, but a high-level view to make this as practical as possible. And if you want to deep dive, then reach out. But very quickly, for the ones who don't know me, because I see so many familiar faces, and I appreciate you joining, what is my story? So my story is, I'm so grateful to be here right now, because had life turned out as I was planning it to, I would have been in a room somewhere performing an open heart surgery. I would have been in hospital, because I grew up in India. And as a boy growing up in India, I was told by my family that, Vishal, you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And from all of those options, I decided to become a doctor. And when I was reflecting on why did I want to become a doctor, specifically a cardiologist, it was because of a story. It was a story told at the dinner table by my father of a very successful cardiologist he knew, and how successful he was and how respected he was. And he was suddenly on the front page of all the newspapers because he did this famous surgery on a politician and saved his life. But as a young 13-year-old at the time, I was like, that's what I want to be. And that was going to be my career for a while, until I was in another workshop. And the speaker this time told us to write our own story. She said, if you could be anything, absolutely anything, what would you do? And no one had asked me that question or given me a blank page to write my story or a future story. And I started writing down all of these things, that I would travel the world, I would learn to speak another language, I would have friends in other parts of the world. And one day I would have the courage to speak on stage like this woman right now. Because I was this shy, geeky, introverted kid, which was stuck in my books, and I was working hard, but I did not have that stage confidence. And I was really inspired by this person and her story. But that process of rewriting my story made me have some difficult conversations at home. I eventually dropped out of my medical career and I went to live abroad. I went to live in France for a whole year. And that was the first time I ever left India. And a whole world somehow opened up to me. And through different twists and turns, I came back and I studied communication and advertising. And I just jumped so deep into the art of storytelling. We had 30 seconds to tell a story. When you sell a product, no matter what the product is, could be a bottle, a phone, you have 30 seconds and you're hardly selling the product or the feature, you're just selling a story to an audience that needs it. So that became my ground for many, many, many years. And all the different things I've done in my career, moving on from advertising, moving upstream towards innovation, was again, like, I want to listen to the stories and needs of real people, the users, and now design services and products for them, not just be good at selling any product to anyone, which I was decent at, right? And currently I work on transformation and change, and all the work I do with large clients and teams going through massive change, it is again the whole process of what is the story. Ujwala, to your point, how do leaders tell stories to inspire their teams? How do we tell stories of the case for change? I've even worked with a bunch of startups and on innovation, and it's always about helping people tell a good story. So across my career, and even in my personal life as a parent, I have to use stories all the time, and I'll talk about it. I also am a coach and I use stories, and I've recently in this pictures actually started telling stories on stage. So this is at an event in Berlin, and I realized, like, wow, people are really hungry for stories. Anyways, story is the red line in my story, and I want to talk about how you can use it in different contexts. Sharon, thank you for joining. You are here to learn how to write better, stronger, more engaging proposals. Great, welcome. All right, so we'll quickly cover the why, what, and the how of story. The why, like, why tell stories? The other thing that I'm most passionate about besides story is connection and community. And that's why for me, this line hits so deep, that the shortest distance between two people is a story. And how can we use stories to build better bridges? Whether we're building trust with a client, within a team, it's really learning how do we build a story and tell a story that matters to people, so that things happen faster, so that people really feel and connect with you on a human level. So for me, stories equals connection, equals trust, equals influence. And if you think about it, we have been telling stories, our ancestors have been telling stories. These are some of the earliest pictures of stories. These are cave paintings, which you'll see across cultures. This is how stories were told. People were drawing and telling stories. People would sit around a fireplace and tell stories. Till date, when I run a workshop, for anyone who's ever been in a workshop with me, I always set up the chairs in a circle, because I say, hey, like, today's workshop is about stories, and it's about the collective intelligence in this room. It is not a top-down presentation, and it's that power of stories of the group that we try to bring to the surface. But stories have always been used. And for the ones wondering from a scientific perspective, like, why do stories actually work? Stories rewire our brain, right? They say neurons that fire together, wire together, right? storytelling actually releases dopamine, which makes stories actually memorable, and they bring focus. Ah, this is what happened. Your brain can connect the dots because it wants to. So it releases dopamine and it releases oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. There have been all of these tests conducted where listeners at a story connect so deeply with the person telling them because of their flaws, because of their challenges, and the bond totally shifts. So I'll talk about one context in which I have used stories to release more oxytocin amongst a team setting, and we'll come to how that happened. But yeah, stories totally change our brain and the way we connect with others. Similarly, on memory, think about any presentation you've been to. How many people actually remember numbers that were shown? 78% of people did this. We had a 22% drop in sales. 19 million people are suffering from this. We forget numbers, right? Because numbers are important, they inform, but stories inspire. A very practical and tactical way that I use stories instead of numbers, and if there was one thing you could take away, this could be it. Instead of going in with a big statistic, which is what people around me would like to do, right? Because numbers feel powerful. I normally go in with a story. It could be a story of one customer, one user. I was working with a social startup of one farmer in India, right? Like think of your users, talk about one user, right? One story. And then you zoom out and say, hey, this story of this user, he is one or she's one of 19 million users who are facing with the same challenge every day. Right? How do we zoom out and then add the number to the story? But start with a real story, and you will notice people will lean into their chairs and actually listen. All right. So this is why story matters. This is what it does to our physiology, our brain chemistry. How can we start telling stories? Again, this is the simplified view, but three things in any good story. One is the character, right? So who is the hero of the story? We all want someone to care about. And as you do this, maybe an invitation for you to think about, take some notes on your own stories. Who is the central character of your story? Maybe it's you and it's your journey. Maybe it's a customer. Maybe it's a team member. Like, who is the person you're solving for? But create a character. Tell us about this person, their hopes and fears, their desires, their challenges, their flaws, the context in which they operate. So tell us about the character. Help us build a connection to this character. Next, tell us about a conflict. There is no story without conflict, right? We all need that tension, that drama for a story to happen. You don't want a story of Jack and Jill were neighbors, they met, they got along, they grew up together, their families connected, and at some point they got married and they had kids and they lived happily ever after. There is no conflict in the story. Is it a nice story? It's cute, but will you remember it? Not really, right? So what is the conflict? What's the tension that you need in a story? You're a startup, you're building your products. You didn't just launch it. Tell us about all the challenges you launched something, it failed, all the external challenges you had, all the team challenges you had, all the product iterations you went to. You're in a job interview. Talk about not just your successes, your failures. Tell us about the conflicts and the challenges you had to overcome, because then we care, right? So introduce conflict. And then after that, we also need closure. So tell us about the resolution. Tell us about how the story comes together. We need a satisfying resolution, but take us on that journey. So yeah, so what's the character and the context of this character? What is the conflict and what's the closure? And if you put these together, stories often look like this. So here's a little story arc, right? And there are many different versions. You see in the hero's journey and other formats, but any story has sort of the beginning. Here's the context, here's the character, here's the plot, right? Establish that foundation, and then something happens. There's that upward moment. There's this inciting incident. So talk about what that is. And then the stakes rise. So show the increase in tension. And then there's this moment, a moment of decision, a moment of conflict, but something has to shift, that moment of climax. From there, the character does a few different things, goes on this journey and adventure to resolve it, and that's the sort of resolution. But every story has these ups and downs, these moments of tension. So what is the arc of your story? People often forget the arc. You sometimes start directly about this is my product, but tell us the backstory. Give us some context, right? Okay, so, and if you think of the story arc, now that you think of it, start noticing, you will notice it everywhere, right? You'll notice it in newspapers, on podcasts, in books, just in your day-to-day context of the stories that you remember at work and at home. So you'll hear the success story, like the story of Sheryl Sandberg and the ups and downs, the story of Simba or Mufasa and the journey that Lion King goes on. I love Obama as a storyteller. If you ever want to watch this video, and some of you have seen this with me, there's this video by Obama called Fired Up, Ready to Go. And it's this amazing campaign where he tells the story of one person and how that led to a whole campaign. But there is something about the power of stories stick. So people talk about success stories all the time, even they go through ups and downs and challenges. What I personally love are stories of failure, right? Tell us about a time you failed. My mother always used to say, when you lose, don't lose the lesson, right? So stories of failure have lessons too. And here's an example, and pardon my French as I share this. There's this famous event in the startup world for the ones who are familiar, because it's global, it's called Fuck Up Nights, right? And it is, people are invited on stage to share stories of failure. So don't just tell us about the wins, tell us about the challenges, the failures, and the lessons learned, because vulnerability creates trust. We all have flaws, and it's nice when someone can, take off their masks and show us their flaws and tell us the human process of their challenges and their triumphs. This makes the story more authentic. So how can you start telling stories of your failure and then show what you got out of them? Most practically, where might you start telling stories? You are here now. Let's think of situations, because you all have a different context. So thank you for sharing those contexts, right? From public sector to proposals, to sales pitches, to startups, to your own resume. So all of those contexts that you've shared, number one is like a basic sales marketing or a startup pitch. That is a clear place to go tell a story. But again, use the story arc to make that story more interesting. I remember I was we were trying to launch a startup idea when I was studying in Australia, and it was a friend and I, and we were launching a new baby bottle. I didn't have kids at the time, but the story we went into the investor room. My friend started with an eye mask on and gave us a story of how he was asleep at 3 a.m. The baby woke up crying, and how he had to suddenly go mix the product in the baby bottle, and it was such a mess, and we had noises of the baby crying, and we made this whole mess in the room. And then we told the investors, like, this is a problem, there must be a better solution. So we explained the context, the character, the challenge, and then went on to explaining our product. We won that startup competition. We did not even have a prototype. We were competing against robotics and all of these like massive teams out there, but we won on the power of our story. Freelancers, if you look at any successful freelancer, you can tell us about your services, but what we care about are the stories. Tell us about the case studies, the clients that you've helped, and what was their situation, what did you support, what were the results. So tell us those stories. Leading teams. So Jwala, to your point, this is how I have seen it work best in my current context. When you're going through change or have a new big ambition, tell us the story. Don't tell us we need to achieve 1 billion by the end of the year, but tell us the story of what success would look like. Even better, co-create the story with your teams on what that could look like. So that could be one way of using it. Ugo and I had this conversation. Sometimes people tell the story. We tell them why we should do this, what should happen, how we should do this, but we don't tell them why now. Even your case for change has a story. Why does this need to happen now? It's only when you tell stories you will inspire people to actually come along. So we run a lot of story workshops in the corporate context to make that happen. And on teams, the story of oxytocin, my favorite team exercise, and I've done this with senior teams around the world, is when a new team comes together or a team is having challenges and the work isn't getting done and impacting the whole organization. I take them out for an offsite. And the first evening, we have dinner, and then we sit around, sometimes around a fireplace, and we tell stories. And it's a very simple question. And the question is, tell me a story about a pivotal moment in your life that shaped you to be who you are today. That's it. One story. And we sit around with 20 people, who are in suits and they're trying to like come up with these stories. We give them time and they come up. The first person gets up and shares the story, and all of a sudden, this corporate persona is off, and we're getting a very human story. And we listen to that story, and you already see tears in the room because it's a story that others connect to. And we go on and do this in the whole circle. I promise you the team shifts after that moment. No slides are used. It's just their own stories, but a safe space with enough psychological safety for these stories to be shared. And the team connects like never before. Because then we figure out that despite our roles and our differences, at the end, we're just humans with our own ups and downs. Even this line that I once heard that is so true is you cannot have an enemy whose story you've heard. So that's how you can use it in a team's context. Parenting, my favorite time of my day is my evening story time with my kids. And we come up with different sort of stories. Either we read a book or we invent a story, or if I need to address a lesson, if the two of them are having a challenge, I tell them a story about growing up with my sibling and the challenges we had and how we resolved them. But coming up with stories that stick. If I tell them not to do something, they don't remember it. But if I tell a story, I promise you, they always remember, and we go back to that as a reference. So using it as parenting. And my favorite place to use it currently is on myself and when I'm coaching. Because through the process of coaching, I have learned that so much of our lives are just the stories we tell ourselves. I had a story for the longest time which shaped me was that I am not good enough. I told myself that story, and that story led me to continuously working harder and seeking approval and the validation of others, because that was my story. And no matter how hard I went, I just had to keep going faster. And at some point I had burnout. And I realized I was just trying to prove myself to others. So rewriting my story on, hey, I am more than enough and I add value, and this is the value that I add, changed how I look at it. So what are the stories you tell yourselves? What are the stories we tell ourselves? And even naming it like, hey, this is the story I have of myself, or this is the story I have about you. I have a story that you are disconnected from me. And the person might say, it's just a story, Vish, I've been busy. So what are the stories we tell? And changing that story can change our lives, quite literally. And I have seen this work on my coaching clients. We rewrite our narratives. So finally, as some practical takeaways, one, how might you start telling these stories is be intentional, right? We started in the beginning with this question, why? Why are you telling the story? How do you want your audience to feel and do afterwards? Two is who is the audience? Like who is listening and how can you tailor it? That's why it helped for me to get a sense of who's attending and what you want to get out of it. Be authentic and vulnerable. People want to hear your ups and your downs, and they just want to see who you truly are. And finally, like practice and refine. Keep what is the story? How do you need to tell it? Where can you increase the arc, decrease the arc, introduce more context? Tell us the backstory. Keep practicing and refining. So to wrap this up, I would say everyone has a story. I know a lot of you on this call, and I know some of your stories, and you have powerful stories, but we forget to tell those stories. So what's your story? And coming out of this like quick power session, my one ask of you is go share your story. Could be on LinkedIn, could be on other social media, could be in a meeting, could be at home, but go tell a story, because the shortest distance between two people is a story, and stories matter. So this brings us to the end of this conversation. So we have some time left for Q&A. Ugo, thank you for having me. Just as a little gift for everyone joining, I'd like to offer one person a 45-minute coaching session on your story, on shaping your narrative. All you have to do is go share your story wherever you decide to do it, and then send me a message on the story you shared and something you got from this conversation. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Vish. Really impressive take on a lot of different insights. I especially like the arc and how that arc matters. I was just wondering for also for myself, at times we are doing, I don't know, a demo meeting or a pitch. And sometimes it's hard to think about the act, the character, because we might not know the other person. So how do you put it in practice on your day-to-day life? You're putting a proposal, I don't know, for Bain or for your coaching clients. How do you bring story there? How do you incorporate that in a way, that the client also resonates with? So do you have an example of that without, of course, disclosing confidential things, but do you have an example on how you incorporate this arc in something as simple as a pitch to a customer that might not be, inclined to hear a story and just wants to hear the numbers,
100%. So this happened to me yesterday. I was presenting to a board and I'm proposing we run a team workshop for them. They're going through a massive change program right now, and the team isn't aligned. So we keep coming to these roadblocks. And I was like, hey, let me just pause. I was recently in the Middle East. This was a situation that a client had. Big company, the challenges they were facing, the team wasn't aligned. And we ran this workshop for them, took them for this 1.5 day offsite. We did these sort of things. And what happened at the end of this was A, B, and C. And this is why the conversation shifted. And it was the power of aligning the leadership team on a common narrative for the organization. But just even sharing the story of another situation made it more real than the slides and the work plan we were presenting. So that sort of helped land the idea. And Ugo, just as a shout out to you, I feel you are a master of storytelling. Like, given your powerful voice on LinkedIn, the post that you shared that resonate the most is you sharing a story of, your personal and professional situation. So you already use the arc even on a LinkedIn post.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, and thanks for the element of it. The other question I had, and also for the people that are in the audience, feel free to ask your questions or your thoughts or something that feels unclear to you. Also, like anything that comes to your mind, feel free to use. Is an open conversation. We still have 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the engagement. But until we get there, one of the things I'm thinking about a story is the distribution and the medium. And I'm thinking your take on how you see stories today, especially with the fact that we are in this kind of short format stories. Everything is in 10 to 30 seconds, 10 to 30 seconds consumption. And it makes it very hard to grasp the audience in such a short period of time. So what do you think about this narrative that stories are becoming shorter and harder to grab attention of people? And how do you see that evolving? And maybe as a second tip, what's your one tip to grab the attention of someone in the first 10 seconds?
I love it. So first of all, I feel stories are getting more and more ingrained in our society. Just the word stories, right? Like Instagram, people post stories. And we're making them easier because they disappear in 24 hours. But hey, it's a story. This is a story of what's happening. So I do see people using short form really well. So again, think about the stories you quickly see while scrolling on LinkedIn or Instagram, and think about like what stories you remember and why. So I think short form can work. And in terms of 10-second stories, have a hook. Sometimes just like starting by saying like, hey, if life had gone as I planned it, I would have been in a hospital room performing an open heart surgery. But through a series of twists and turns, I ended up here today. And over the next 30 minutes, I'll share my story. But again, I've given you like a hook on what happens at the end. So maybe it's that, like start with a hook. Get people interested.
Yeah, I do notice, at least in the conversation that we are having now, I notice that when I'm sharing, doing a demo or a pitch, I tend to start also sometimes with a question to just see what comes from the other side. Yeah, so just to start opening and getting some of the sense of what the other side is thinking, being a client, a partner, a prospect, a customer. And that question opens up sometimes to good insights that you can leverage upon and build upon. And sometimes doesn't give anything and you have to keep on moving. Within stories, because not everyone is comfortable on sharing publicly. Yeah, not everyone is comfortable on LinkedIn or on video. It's also a threshold to pass for ourselves. It took me a while, and it still takes me a while to accept that. What are ways that you can practice a story, without being out there? Have you seen a way where we can practice stories, but we also might be in the comfort of not being always visibly or publicly present?
Ugo, that example is me, right? I always tell you are so active on LinkedIn and you share so much, but I don't share. I'm just like have my head down and I'm busy working. And you always encourage me to like, hey, Vish, like put your voice out there. So I think it's just about finding out what are some baby steps you can do to start telling your stories. Maybe you just want to think of what happened in a day and like share it online. Go tell a story at your family dinner table. I've recently started doing this thing with friends. I invite them when we're at dinner or at a meeting. I'm like, hey, by the way, what's the story of like a key decision that you took that shaped your life in a big way? Or tell me, or I play some sort of game on right now. What's some advice you got from someone that shaped that is still present with you today? But again, giving a prompt that allows people to share a story is a good forum to start just practicing those stories. Try it at your next meeting. So even if you have a team of 5, you can think of like, how do I go share a story there? I don't have to share it in front of like 5,000 people online. But yeah, play with it. Should I take Matt's question?
Yeah, I'll add to the stream.
Oh, great.
Yeah, do you have a particular cue to determine if a story is too long? When I'm telling a story in my head, I'm telling myself I'm talking too much, get to the point. Maybe it's a short form culture we are accustomed to. Any advice there for Matt? And by the way, Matt, I also feel the same.
Yeah.
At times it's hard to stay sharp and focus and to the point. So Vish, your thoughts on this?
100%, right? It's that message on like, what is my intention? Why am I telling this story, and who am I telling this story? What do they want to get out of it? And how much time do I have? If I have a 1 hour meeting, then can I use the first 5-10 minutes to tell the story? That works. So just like knowing what the context is for the story. So that could be a way to do it, is know your context.
And
but maybe just Matt, to that point. So sometimes people have an hour-long meeting and they feel, oh wow, I can't take 5 minutes to tell the story, but take the 5 minutes. It's worth it. It sets the tone. Or invite other stories, and then the content will go faster. Mariella has a question. What if you have a negative story for a client and they want to get to it right away? I feel like the story arc would already start with the climax. You have a negative story for the client. Okay, so there's a client who has a challenging situation and they want to get to it right away. Yeah, that's the beauty with the story arc or anything, is it's not a B, C, D, E. A story can start anywhere. So you can start a story at the end. The number of movies you watch which starts with the final scene and then it takes you back to the beginning, like start with the middle, like, hey, I can tell that right now we have a critical situation on our hands. I acknowledge this and we need to address it. Let's just pause for a second and let's go back to the origin story. Let's go to the backstory. What happened there, right? You were successful, you were growing. Let's understand that. Okay, now you're facing this massive challenge. What are the things that led to this? So you can help like literally like plot and anchor the story.
Yeah,
it's that's what I feel like. There's a science to storytelling, like the arc and the elements, but the art is you can mix and match these stories in different ways. Right? Or even Marla, to your point, you can say like, hey, I have another client who had this situation even worse. Let me tell you their story and then come back to this.
On an interesting one on that one, I just had a client meeting which was going around budget. And budget with the CEO is always like, give me the budget, give me the investment, and then just go, because I have 15 minutes. So yeah, to the point of Marielle, knowing the CEO, at least I knew already that he is a kind of no bullshit person. So I started with the end in mind, which is, look, this is the total cost you will be expecting. So you get, yes, peace of mind. Here is a number, and let me guide you to this number, and also what are the alternatives? Because I already know that it's going to challenge it. So let me already be ahead of time and present the alternatives. But allows me to get out of the way the thing that he wants to get to, and doesn't need a preamble. But allow me also to get the space to say, here is a number, and now give me the space to tell you how this number comes to life, and where you have the bandwidth to discuss. And that allowed me to tell the story, but in a different format.
Yeah.
And I also asked him, look, do you prefer to listen to everything and call and have questions at the end, or do you want me to pause in between? Yeah. So just that question, he says, no, go through everything and I'll pause in the end. And then I ask, look, so I'm going to need about 10 minutes uninterrupted time. So all that expectation build up is part of the story. I'm going to need about 10 minutes of uninterrupted attention, and then we're going to get there. So then I have a 10-minute arc to make that point across. So yeah, so just sorry, a side note, because I felt that this was very close to my.
No, it's true. If you think of the classic example of Steve Jobs being a good storyteller, right? What Steve Jobs would do is literally walk with a tiny device and say 1,000 songs in your pocket. And we've heard the launches, but would go tell the teams, we're going to launch this thing that is crazy. How will we do it? But he had to go inspire his teams first to be like, okay, we have the next year or 6 months or 3 months to launch this, but this is what this would mean for our customers. So yeah, like I think painting a picture of the end is a great place to start. Again, to Ujjwala's point.
One last question from Karim, and then we'll be respectful of the concept.
Right.
What are your tips on how to be a good listener for stories?
I mean, Karim, I'm trying to interpret your question in 2 ways. One is, like when someone is telling a story, how do you listen well? And one thing that I actually do is it's a fact that all of us have stories, but sometimes the storyteller doesn't know how to tell a good story. So when I'm listening to a story, I'm like, hey, Kareem, that's a super interesting story, but pause right there. Tell me more, like even before like you went to this meeting, tell me more about like what happened, who's the client, how are you feeling in that morning? So again, Matt, to your question, it feels like I'm actually asking for more details, but I'm helping them build the context. And then they talk about what happened. But because they know their story, we sometimes forget what the listener doesn't know. I don't know the details and I care about it. So, wow, how did you feel walking into that meeting? What do you think was happening? How was your team feeling? Okay, then what happened? Okay, go on with your story. Okay, pause. So, wow, you just presented this crazy idea. How did you feel? Because even when I talk about conflict, there's an external conflict, right? No budget, lack of time, world is changing, market is shifting, pandemic happens. There are external factors, but what I love listening to is what was the internal conflict. Like I entered that meeting feeling I'm an imposter. I entered feeling conflicted because I want to pitch this idea, but I don't really have the budget for it yet. So you can also talk about your personal internal challenges because that shows the vulnerability. So, yeah, so that's how you listen and get the stories. But also the other one is how do we listen for stories is we all have a lot of stories. So it's also an art to dig out our own stories. I sometimes notice that I'm like, hey, we have stories. Like, how do we share it in a simple way?
No, those are really great tips. And on me, on the practical side, on the good listening, even now listening to you, Vish, I always have the notebook. Yeah, that's if I'm writing as I'm listening, I feel that I'm capturing parts of it. Increase my attention, removing the tabs and the digital noise. That's if I'm listening digitally. And the last one that helps me a lot, and is one I've been using for the people that love the whole AI moment. All my voice notes are now directly with AI, because I instructed AI to listen to my voice notes and structure them for the future. So when people ask me how do you write so much on LinkedIn, most of the times this is what I have on my mind. This is everything that's coming, the context. I just put like 5 minutes of notes, and then he structures for me, and then he makes it easy for me to remember what was the point in the first place. So anyway,
actually, I have tried it. I've tried using AI for storytelling.
Yeah.
I've like put in my story and I've said like, hey, like put this on a story arc or help me understand what the challenges were. Help me. Yeah. So try it, play with it.
Yeah. Well, with all of this right on the clock, Vish, thank you so much for joining and sharing your story and sharing about the power of stories, the arc, the why now, the different tips, being intentional, and all the notes. For everyone else, the replay will be available within the next hour, so you can take a look. And stay tuned for the next episodes. Vish, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you everyone for joining. So good to see new faces and old ones all together.
Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.